Welcome back to Hardware Unboxed. Today we are revisiting the Radeon R9 390 for what's probably going to be the last time, at least with the dedicated content piece. And that's because last week AMD halted support for the Radeon 300 series, along with the 7000, 8200 and Fury series. All of these GPUs have been moved to a legacy model, and that means they won't receive any additional driver support moving forward. And as a result, Radeon Adrenalin driver 21.5.2 will be the last supported driver for these GPUs. Now, it's hardly surprising that AMD decided to end support for decade-old products like the Radeon HD 7000 series, and recently Nvidia also ceased support of its Kepler-based GPUs. The Radeon 200 series is now 8 years old, and that seems like a reasonable period to offer support. The 300 and Fury series, though, is only 6 years old and still perform reasonably well in today's games, so it may be a little bit too early to go axing support. Therefore, we created a poll asking you guys if you thought it was too early to end support for GPUs such as the Radeon R9 390, and half of you said yes, it's too early, while 28% said no, and 21% said maybe? So we're proud to see that the 20% club has adopted our motto of it depends. Personally though, I do think it is a bit too soon to end support for the 300 and Fury series, and I also think AMD's timing here is rather poor. Had they announced that support for 6-year-old products was ending, some of which were rather expensive, but had they done this after the GPU crisis, at which point both AMD and Nvidia should be offering much better products for $200 to $300, then I think it would have been a non-issue for just about all gamers. But for AMD to make this announcement at a time when gamers are scrambling to get their hands on literally any graphics card they can, GeForce GT 710 included, I think axing support for perfectly fine products like the Radeon R9 390 was a bit of a boneheaded decision. Anyway, it's happening, so I guess we should talk about what this means for Radeon owners using these older GPUs. In short, it means no further optimization for new and existing games, but it doesn't mean games will no longer work or that you have to throw out your graphics card immediately, but it does mean if performance or stability is compromised, it'll go unfixed. Future games will likely still run on this hardware, but if there's any major performance issues, bugs, crashing and so on, those won't be fixed. Likewise, for any existing games that see major updates or changes that happen to break performance or stability, that won't be addressed either. So, if you have a Radeon R9 390 and it runs the games you play without any issues, that will continue to be the case unless any major changes are made to the game, at which point it becomes a bit of a roll of the dice. All of that said, just how usable is a graphics card like the Radeon R9 390 in 2021? To find out, I'm going to use a similar format to that of the recent Radeon RX 580 and GeForce GTX 1060 6GB revisits, and for comparison, I will actually be including the GTX 1060 data. For those of you who missed that content, I'll quickly explain the benchmark format. Rather than compare the R9 390 with a range of modern GPUs using a single quality preset, we're instead making a comparison with a single GPU and focusing on quality preset testing. So 2 resolutions, each of which has been tested using 3 different quality settings, and in total we have data for 15 new or popular games to look at. Finally, all testing has been conducted on our Ryzen 9 5950X test system using 32GB of DDR4 3200CL14 memory. So the results are going to be entirely GPU limited. Okay, let's get into it. Starting with Assassin's Creed Valhalla, which is a 2020 release, and one of the most demanding games we got last year, the Radeon R9 390 performs reasonably well, all things considered. Admittedly, it's no 1440p gaming graphics card, but at 1080p using the lowest quality preset you can enjoy the game at 60fps, so it is very playable. And even the 50ish FPS experience with the medium quality settings was rather good, though things start to feel a little bit console-ish using the high settings as frame rates dip into the 30s. So when using the low quality settings, which did allow for 61 FPS on average at 1080p, the R9 390 was just 13% slower than the GTX 1060 6GB. So again, a great result given its age, and remember, it only cost $330 US brand new in mid-2015. Now, this is a good example where old graphics cards, such as the R9 390, can still offer gamers a great deal of value. If you primarily play games like Rainbow Six Siege and do so using competitive quality settings, there's really no need to upgrade from this old Radeon GPU. We're looking at over 144 FPS with the high quality settings at 1080p, and even at 1440p it managed over 100 FPS. Moreover, we're pretty much looking at GTX 1060 6GB light performance in this title. So the lack of driver support shouldn't change these numbers moving forward, unless of course Rainbow Six Siege receives a major overhaul, but even then that may be done in a way that doesn't negatively impact performance of old GPUs, in fact it could even help. Moving on, we have Biomutant, and this is a new single-player action role-playing game. So that being the case, if you can achieve 60 FPS here, most gamers will be happy, especially those making do with older hardware. The R9 390 just scrapes by at 1080p using the low-quality preset, and then just falls short with the medium settings. That being the case, 1440p is mostly out of the question. Perhaps the low-quality settings here will be okay, but if you're after that 60 FPS experience, then 1080p really is the go. Although the R9 390 was showing its age in Biomutant, performance in Outriders is excellent, especially relative to the GTX 1060. Here we're looking at identical performance to that of the mid-range Pascal GPU, and that means playable performance at 1080p using the higher quality settings, and even a 60 FPS-like experience at 1440p using low. The R9 390 also performed quite well in Horizon Zero Dawn, consistently trailing the GTX 1060 by around an 8% margin, which certainly isn't bad, and that meant it was spitting out 75 FPS on average at 1080p using the Favor Performance preset. 65 FPS with Original, which can be considered a medium type setting, and then 54 FPS using Favor Quality. So that's certainly very playable at 1080p, and for those wanting to game at 1440p, you can still achieve 52 FPS with the lowest quality preset. Shadow of the Tomb Raider certainly isn't the newest title I've got here for testing, but it is still very demanding and a good test for modern GPUs. That being the case, the R9 390 is very impressive here, delivering highly playable performance at 1080p, though be aware we're not testing with the highest and high quality presets, but medium still looks great and is quite demanding. So at 1080p we're looking at 53 FPS on average with the medium quality preset, 66 FPS with low, and then 81 FPS using the lowest preset. Then for those of you targeting 1440p, we're still looking at 60 FPS on average with the lowest quality preset, 50 FPS with low, and then we did drop below 40 FPS using medium. Still, overall great performance in Shadow of the Tomb Raider from this old Radeon GPU. Now, Doom Eternal is a great example of a game that can still be fully enjoyed using aging hardware. Here we're looking at a silky smooth 95 FPS on average using the Nightmare preset, and part of that great result is due to the 8GB VRAM buffer of the R9 390. Even at 1440p, you can enjoy 73 FPS on average using the Nightmare preset, and it is worth mentioning that you will require at least 8GB of VRAM to run this preset at 1440p. Death Stranding is a new and rather visually impressive game, and yet here the R9 390 is again able to deliver highly playable performance at 1080p. Using the default quality preset, which is the second highest in the game, you're looking at 68 FPS on average, then 71 FPS using medium, and 77 FPS with high. Then, even at 1440p, it's still possible to keep the frame rate above 50 FPS, and that means the old R9 390 isn't a great deal slower than the GTX 1060 6GB. Dirt 5's not a super demanding game, especially for those targeting 1080p, and here the R9 390 is good for 60 FPS on average using the medium quality preset, then 75 FPS with low, and 85 FPS using ultra low, and that makes the Radeon GPU around 10% slower than the GTX 1060. Quite interestingly, at 1440p, the R9 390 and GTX 1060 delivered virtually identical performance, and this means if you're willing to play with lower quality settings, it is possible to get up around 60 FPS. The R9 390 is slower than the GTX 1060 and Watch Dogs Legion, but the margin isn't that large, particularly given this is an Nvidia-sponsored title. Although the old Radeon GPU is 10 to 13% slower at 1080p, we're still looking at 62 FPS using the low quality preset and 56 FPS using medium, so either will deliver a solid experience. The 1440p performance is less convincing, and you'll really want to be using the lowest quality preset here. Resident Evil Village proves that new games can be both visually impressive and super well optimized for older hardware. Here the R9 390 matched the GTX 1060 almost exactly, and that meant using the maximum in-game quality settings, with ray tracing disabled of course. The old Radeon GPU was good for roughly 60 FPS on average at 1080p. Meanwhile, it was possible to push over 100 FPS using the performance mode and 77 FPS at 1440p. Unfortunately though, there are games like Cyberpunk 2077 that make achieving a 60 FPS experience nearly impossible. Although the R9 390 was still very impressive here, at least relative to the GTX 1066GB, it wasn't good enough to deliver 60 FPS at 1080p, falling just short of 50 FPS. It is playable, but if your requirement is for 60 FPS, then you really won't be having a good time here. The R9 390 isn't as impressive as the GTX 1060 and Forza Horizon 4, but even so, we're still looking at almost 60 FPS at 1440p using the Ultra preset. Quite incredible really, given just how great the game looks. Needless to say, beyond that, performance is excellent, and the R9 390 did a great job of running Forza. Star Wars Jedi Fallen Order was a lot more challenging, but even so, performance was decent at 1080p using the high quality preset, and then very playable with medium, though I'd say 1440p is mostly off the table. Last up, we have F1 2020, and this game runs really well on just about anything, at least when using the low quality settings. Here the R9 390 cranked out 138 FPS at 1080p using the low quality preset, 121 FPS with medium, and then an impressive 67 FPS using the ultra high preset, which is the highest quality setting in the game. Even at 1440p, you can enjoy over 100 FPS using the ultra low preset, and then 82 FPS using medium. Okay, so here's a look at the 15 game average data, and as you can see, overall the Radeon R9 390 isn't a great deal slower than the GTX 1066GB. Not only that, but at 1080p you can typically achieve highly playable performance using medium quality settings, and sometimes even double with high to ultra. For those gaming at 1440p though, the R9 390 is more of a low preset type graphics card that can at times run with the medium quality settings. Still, given its age, I feel like this is a very solid result. Obviously, if you purchased the Radeon R9 390 back in 2015 at the MSRP, which was $330 US, and you've still got it today, well, I think it's safe to say you got your money's worth. You've essentially paid $55 per year for your graphics card. Though I doubt many who purchased an R9 390 are still using it today. They've likely long since upgraded. Though I'm sure there are some original owners who still have the card running in secondary systems. Most R9 390 owners likely purchased their cards secondhand, and quite shockingly they are still currently selling on eBay for around $250 US. So I don't recommend you race out and buy one of those if you're in desperate need of a graphics card, because for just $50 more, you should be able to land a GeForce GTX 1066GB, and you can expect Nvidia will be supporting that product for at least the next few years. Of course, if you have an R9 390 laying around, I'd strongly recommend flogging it off on eBay while you can. It's rare that you can recover 75% of your investment 6 years later, especially for a product that's no longer supported by the manufacturer. Speaking of driver support, as I noted at the start of the video, you can expect the performance shown in this video to stand, at least for the most part. But as I've said, if a game like Doom Eternal, for example, which currently runs really well in the R9 390, if that game receives a major update, that could possibly break performance, and if it does, Radeon 200, 300 and Fury owners are likely screwed. But I expect this to be a rare occurrence. It's also worth noting that some games won't even run without a certain driver version installed. So if an upcoming game like, let's say, Far Cry 6 requires AMD's Day 1 driver to operate, and that driver obviously won't support the R9 390, well, then the game simply won't work on that product. And unless the community successfully hacks the driver, you won't be able to play using the older hardware. But again, I do expect this to be a rare occurrence. Now you might be wondering, why would game developers lock out older hardware using this method? But the reasoning is reasonable enough. Basically, they don't want gamers trying to play the game with outdated drivers that perhaps don't work properly, and that could lead to things like bugs, stability issues, and so on. So rather than waste time supporting users running outdated software, they simply enforce a minimum driver version. This sort of thing can be quite disappointing, especially if the hardware is able to run the game at a satisfactory level. And as we've just seen, for the most part, the Radeon R9 390 is still quite a capable product. And that means, of course, products like the Radeon R9 390X, the R9 Nano, the R9 Fury, and the Fury X, as well as the Radeon Pro Duo, don't forget about that one, well, they're all faster again, so they're all going to deliver performance as good or better than what we've just seen here. So fingers crossed that continues to be the case and they continue working for a bit longer yet. Anyway, that is going to do it for this revisit of the Radeon R9 390. If you enjoyed it, be sure to give it a thumbs up. As I said, this may be the last dedicated content piece to this particular graphics card. We'll probably move on to revisiting not so old products, would make sense. But anyway, like, you can subscribe if you haven't done so already. You can also support the channel directly on Floatplane or Patreon. The links for those in the video description. You'll get access to a monthly live stream that Tim and myself do for those members. We also have BTS stuff, so behind the scenes content, Q&As, and a really awesome exclusive Discord server. So yeah, when you sign up, you get access to that. Tim and myself, you can ping us in there, chat to us there, and yeah, we've got a great community. Anyway, if you're interested, the links are in the video description. If not, perfectly fine. And I would like to just thank you for watching this video. I'm your host, Steve, and I'll see you again next time.